84 years, that was the number, not that anyone had remembered, of course. I woke up that morning with the faint pain in my knees and the usual stiffness in my back that never quite went away, no matter how I shifted or stretched. The light filtering through the faded curtains of my small corner of the house was softer than usual, almost gentle, as if it too remembered. But no voices followed. No footsteps approaching, no clatter of pans in the kitchen. Silence greeted me like an old friend. I sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the ache blooming down my spine. My blanket was thin but neatly folded, the way I always kept it, out of habit rather than expectation. The slippers at my feet still bore the shape of use, worn around the edges where my toes pressed hardest. I slid into them, stood, and walked into the hallway that led toward the kitchen, my bones clicking, my breath steady, my presence as light as I could make it. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels deliberate, no breakfast on the stove, no warm tea waiting. Just a single empty cup in the sink and a cold countertop. My son had already left for work, I assumed, his wife likely too. Their schedules were busy, always full of errands and meetings and friends I never met. I used to be part of that rhythm once. Now I only heard the echoes of it when they forgot to shut a door gently, or when their laughter floated down from upstairs, a floor above where I was allowed to exist. I didn't expect gifts. I didn't expect a party. I didn't expect balloons or candles or even a single slice of cake. But a happy birthday might have meant something, just 2 words. They wouldn't have cost anything. I had given my life to raising that boy, and somehow in the process I became invisible. I washed the single cup, dried it, and returned to my room. The floor creaked beneath my weight. The walls still bore the faint markings of when this was once his childhood space, now mine by quiet exile. I sat down at the edge of my bed and pulled from under it a tin box, the kind that once held cookies but now held paper memories, old letters, photographs. A locket that no longer worked, a drawing he had made of me when he was 6 years old. "My hero," it said under a stick figure woman with a cape. I stared at that picture longer than I intended to. I wasn't feeling sorry for myself, not exactly. I had endured more difficult things in life. Losing my husband too early, teaching school on empty budgets, surviving through illness and war and loneliness. But this slow erasure of worth, it was a different kind of grief. Not sudden, not violent, just quiet, like water slowly wearing away stone. The morning passed slowly. I did the chores as usual, folded the laundry that wasn't mine, wiped down counters that hadn't been used by me, cleaned a floor no one noticed I cleaned. They never asked me to, but not being asked didn't mean I could leave it undone. That too had become routine. Around midday, I heard the front door open and close. I didn't leave my room. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be a reminder of something inconvenient. I sat, hands folded, listening to the soft murmur of voices that didn't mention my name. My presence in this house had become an afterthought, like the coat rack no one used anymore but still hung by the door because no one had gotten around to throwing it out. It wasn't until evening that they came to my door. I had just finished changing into my nightgown, thinking I'd try to sleep early to forget the day. But then came the knock. And not the gentle kind, the kind that makes you stand quickly even when your body protests. I opened it to see both of them, my son and his wife, standing there with forced expressions. She carried a box. He looked away. And before I could make sense of anything, they told me, not kindly, not softly, they said there wasn't enough space anymore. That I was getting too old to manage stairs, that it was time I found somewhere else. They said I would be more comfortable somewhere quiet, but I heard the subtext. They were done with me. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I didn't ask where they thought I should go, I just nodded and took the box from her hands. My life, what little of it they let me keep, fit in that box. Some clothes, my medicine, a toothbrush. No room for the tin of memories. I would have to carry that separately. They didn't drive me anywhere. They didn't even walk me to the gate. They just watched as I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The evening light casting long shadows around my feet. The breeze was cooler than I expected. The sound of traffic not far away hummed like an indifference too loud to ignore. I stood there for a long time. Cars passed, people passed. None of them looked twice. I walked. My knees ached with each step, but I walked. Not because I knew where I was going, but because standing still felt worse. I walked past familiar houses that no longer knew my name, past children on bikes who would never know I had once taught children like them to read, past convenience stores and shuttered windows and alleys that whispered fear after dark. The street lamps came on one by one as the sky dimmed. I found a bench in a park and sat. And for the first time that day, I let the weight of it settle. I was 84, I had no home, no family who wanted me, no plan. Just a birthday and a box. But somewhere inside me, there was still a small, flickering light. The same light that had carried me through every hard year before. The same one that had whispered, "Keep going," when everything else said, "Give up." I sat with that light. I let it breathe. And I waited to see what would happen next. The bench was hard, its metal frame cooled by the evening air, but I barely noticed the discomfort. My bones had grown used to worse things. What weighed more was the growing heaviness in my chest, a quiet ache that pulsed with every breath. I tried to focus on the rhythm of the breeze or the occasional rustle of a bird in the hedges, but even those sounds seemed to fade behind the pounding of my thoughts. A birthday alone was one thing. A birthday discarded was something else entirely. I didn't know how long I sat there. At some point the air grew damper, the clouds darker. The wind picked up, tugging at my cardigan, sending leaves skittering across the pavement like whispers of things once alive. I pulled the thin fabric tighter around myself, but it was no match for the cold creeping in. My fingers stiffened, and I tucked them under my arms, curling inward, trying to make myself small, invisible, less of a target for whatever came next. That's when the first drop hit my cheek. Then another. Rained. Soft at first, almost hesitant, then steadier, faster. A full curtain descending from the sky, like the world's quiet agreement that I had reached the final threshold of abandonment. I could have laughed at the symbolism, but my throat was too tight for that. So I sat there, letting the rain soak through my clothes, my shoes, my dignity. People hurried past, umbrellas popping open like shields. Some glanced my way just long enough to register discomfort, then looked away. No one stopped, not one. Until her. I didn't see her approach. Just a sudden hush in the rain's rhythm, a shift in the light, and then the feeling of someone standing before me, present still. Not in motion like the rest of the world. I expected her to say something, but she didn't. She just stood there for a moment, and then I felt something soft and dry wrap around my shoulders. A coat, her coat. She helped me up. Not urgently, not forcefully, but with a patience I hadn't felt in years. Her hand, warm and steady, guided mine as I clutched the box tighter. My fingers trembled around the edges, afraid that if I let go of this one small container, everything I had left would scatter into the storm. We walked, or rather she walked slowly beside me while I shuffled forward, each step slow, deliberate, measured against the pain that surged up my legs. I couldn't look at her. I didn't want her to see what my eyes might say, how long it had been since someone held my hand without obligation. The rain didn't stop. It became background, a wet heartbeat in the city's chest. Cars passed, horns blared. But none of it seemed to matter. The world had grown smaller, just me, her, the box, and the weight of something I didn't yet understand. She led me into a small building tucked between a florist and a laundromat. A narrow stairwell led to a modest second-floor apartment. The walls were warm-colored. A single lamp glowed in the corner. The space smelled of jasmine tea and freshly ironed clothes. It wasn't grand, but it breathed of life, genuine, unforced, lived in. She motioned toward a chair. I sat. My clothes were wet, clinging to my skin like memory, but the room was warm. She placed a blanket over my legs, light but enough. I stared at the room in silence. A bookshelf stood against the wall, full of titles I once knew. A framed painting of a street market hung above the table, lively and chaotic and beautiful. The windowsill held potted herbs, basil, mint, and something else I couldn't name. Life was here, quiet, thoughtful life. She disappeared briefly and then returned with a cup of something hot. She placed it on the table beside me. The steam curled upward, carrying the faint scent of ginger and lemongrass. I watched it swirl. It reminded me of winters in the village, back when tea wasn't a luxury but a necessity, when neighbors brought you warmth before you even asked for it. I didn't speak, not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't know where to begin. How do you condense 84 years into something legible? How do you explain the kind of tired that isn't just in your body, but in your memory, in your trust, in your hope? She didn't pressure me. She sat across the room, not too close, not too far, giving me space to breathe in the strangeness of kindness. Eventually, I looked around and noticed the little details. A pair of shoes by the door, slightly worn at the heel. A calendar pinned to the wall with scribbles in blue ink, appointments perhaps, or dreams. A photograph on the desk of a girl standing under a tree, her smile wide and hopeful. That girl was her, and I realized she was no stranger to solitude. She moved around the room quietly, preparing something in the kitchen. The sound of boiling water, the clink of ceramic dishes. The hum of a kettle, it all wrapped around me like a lullaby I hadn't heard in years. My box sat at my feet, damp now, the corners softened by rain. I reached down and opened it, pulling from it the tin. I opened the lid and stared at the contents, the fragments of a life too easily dismissed. The picture he drew of me, the wedding ring. I couldn't wear any more, the key to a house that no longer wanted me. The tears came before I could stop them. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet streaks running down a face that had learned long ago how to endure. I wiped them away before she returned, ashamed somehow of the vulnerability, even though I owed her no pride. She brought over a bowl of something warm. Porridge, maybe. The scent was comforting. I took the first bite slowly. My hands shook slightly, but I kept going. Each spoonful tasted like acknowledgement, not of grandeur, but of being seen, of still existing. That night she made up a bed for me in the corner, not a couch. A real bed, clean sheets, a pillow that smelled of lavender. She turned off the light with a gentleness I hadn't known in years. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain finally stop. It was the first time in a long time I didn't feel like a ghost. I didn't know her name. I didn't know why she had stopped for me when no one else did. But I knew with every beat of my fragile heart that this night, this simple act of care, had rewoven something inside me I thought was gone. I was still here. Still someone. Still worth stopping for. Morning came with a softness I hadn't known in years. The first rays of light filtered through a sheer curtain and laid themselves gently across the floor, like a quiet invitation to begin again. For a few seconds, I forgot where I was. My body, conditioned by decades of habit, expected the chill of that back room, the creak of that old house, the sound of people I loved pretending I didn't exist. But then the unfamiliar scent of lavender met my nose. And I saw the pale blue walls, the tidy shelves, the folded blanket at the foot of a bed that wasn't mine. I remembered. I had been rescued. Not with fanfare, not by someone with loud promises or savior's pride, but by a stranger with kind eyes and quiet hands. She had said nothing and yet spoken everything. In the silence of her one-room apartment, I had found more dignity than I had in years of shared meals and hollow birthdays. I sat up slowly. My joints reminded me of their age, but there was a different kind of strength behind the stiffness now, a purpose, however fragile. I folded the blanket carefully and adjusted the corners of the bed, unwilling to leave even a crease out of place. I was a guest here. But more than that, I was grateful in a way that made even small gestures feel sacred. The room smelled of tea and warm bread. She had risen earlier than me, it seemed. I could hear her in the other room, the muffled rhythm of a kettle being filled, the light hum of a song under her breath. I didn't disturb her. I sat in the corner chair and let my eyes travel along the walls, taking in the pieces of a life I hadn't yet known. Books everywhere, some neatly shelved, others stacked in humble towers on the floor. Their spines were worn but well kept, suggesting not neglect but repeated love. The titles were a mix: literature, psychology, poetry, some old textbooks with underlined notes. On the windowsill, the herbs I had noticed the night before now basked in the sunlight. Basil, rosemary, maybe thyme. I didn't know how she kept them alive in such a small space, but there they were, green and proud. Beside the herbs sat a single photograph in a wooden frame, no glass, just open to the air as though it were meant to be touched. A child, maybe 7 or 8, stood in the center. She looked serious but not sad. Her hair was tied back tightly, her clothes clean but worn. Behind her stood a figure I couldn't quite make out. Something in the image pulled at me. I leaned in closer, squinting at the faded details. The edges of a school building, a small wooden desk, a blackboard in the background. And then, unmistakably, the outline of a woman's hand resting gently on the child's shoulder. My heart paused for a beat. It was me. Not now, not as this hunched, forgotten version, but as I had been once, a teacher, steady and proud, hair pulled into a bun. Cardigan buttoned all the way, eyes focused not on cameras but on the children entrusted to me. That photo, this room, it held something I couldn't yet name. She entered just then, holding a tray. The scent of ginger tea rose like a balm. She placed the tray down and offered me a faint smile. Still, she said nothing. It was as though words would have only disrupted the spell between us, and somehow I didn't need them. I simply nodded and took the cup, my hands warming around it. As I sipped, something inside me stirred, not just memory but something deeper, a recognition. That girl in the photo. I looked at her now, this woman so self-contained, so kind yet so solitary. Her face held the same shape, matured and refined. Her eyes, once hard and watchful in the photo, now carried a gentleness that only came with age and pain and choice. I didn't ask. I didn't need to, I knew. I had taught hundreds of children in my years, but I remembered the quiet ones. The ones who didn't speak until spoken to. The ones who sat in the front row hoping not to disappear. She had been one of them. I tried to place the year, the town, the class. It came back slowly, as though emerging from underwater. A little girl with a bruised cheek one day said she fell. A shy hand always raised to answer but never loud enough to be heard. A child who stayed after school pretending to forget her things, just to sit in silence where no one yelled. I had made space for her. Given her extra chalk to draw. Let her carry the attendance sheet, not for the task, but to give her a role that mattered. And now here she was. I opened my mouth not to ask, but to speak. To say something that had been caught in my chest since I was cast out of the house I once called home. But the words stuck, too heavy, so I did what I knew how to do best. I reached down into the box by my side and lifted the tin of memories. I placed it on the table between us and opened the lid. One by one, I removed its contents. The photo my son had drawn of me, the wedding ring, the handkerchief with my initials embroidered in green thread, the certificate from the school where I'd spent the last 2 decades of my career. Each item was faded, worn, but unmistakably mine. She watched quietly, eyes scanning each piece not with judgment but with a kind of reverence. When I placed the last item on the table, the class photo from 1987, she leaned in. Her hand reached out before she realized it. Hovering over the edge of the photo, her fingers trembled just slightly. Then something remarkable happened. She smiled, not broadly, not dramatically, but in that small, sacred way that people smile when a locked door inside them swings open. I didn't need confirmation, I knew. I had saved her once, not by doing anything grand, but by noticing, by making room, by seeing her when no one else did. And now, all these years later, she had saved me in return. Not out of debt, not out of guilt, but out of something far more powerful, gratitude. That night, as I lay again in her extra bed, I let the memory of her as a child drift across my mind. I remembered her drawings, always in black crayon, until I gave her a box of colored pencils. I remembered her handwriting, small, slanted, determined. I remembered the day she brought me a flower pressed between notebook paper, saying nothing. Just leaving it on my desk before rushing away. I had never known what became of her. Now I did. And for the first time in a long time, I felt not just safe, but proud. Proud that something I once gave had bloomed beyond me. That even in a life full of losses, I had left a trace that mattered. In her home, I was not a burden. I was not a guest. I was not forgotten. I was remembered. Some days open like windows, quietly without warning, and when you least expect it, they let in light you didn't know was still out there. That morning was like that. The air was cool, not cold, and carried the faint scent of warm rice and jasmine tea. My old limbs, though stiff as ever, moved with less resistance, as if they too had found something to wake for. The ache in my heart hadn't vanished, but it no longer pulled at me like an anchor. It sat beside me now, something I had learned to carry rather than escape. She had already left for work. She de-scribbled a note on a yellow piece of paper and left it near the tea tin. I couldn't read it well, my eyes weren't what they used to be, but I recognized the care in how it was folded. People think love has to be loud. They're wrong. Sometimes it's folded paper and hot tea, and a room you're allowed to breathe in. The small apartment was still and sunlit, the dust motes dancing in golden strands that cut through the curtains. I found myself wandering slowly through her space, not out of intrusion but curiosity. There were few things in life more intimate than silence, and she had trusted me with hers. Near the bookshelf, tucked beneath a stack of paperbacks, was an old photo album, its leather cracked with time, corners frayed. I hesitated before pulling it out, but something urged me forward. Not out of selfishness, but because I wanted to understand the world that had shaped her. The album opened with a creak, and I found myself staring into decades of her life. There she was, a child with two large shoes and eyes that always looked just to the left of the camera. There she was again, older, in a school uniform too big for her frame, holding a certificate with two hands, like it might float away otherwise. There were photos of her in her teens, standing by school buildings, sitting at a library table alone, her focus always on a book or the floor, never the lens. I saw no birthday cakes, no crowds. Just a growing girl stitched into spaces that seemed always slightly too small for her light. And then, toward the middle, I found it. A picture of me. Not alone. I was sitting at my desk, my old wooden desk with the chipped corner and the hand-painted globe, and she was standing beside me, younger than I remembered, her hand resting shyly near mine, our bodies angled slightly apart, yet unmistakably connected. She had kept that photo all these years. My breath caught in my throat. Not because I was surprised, she remembered me, but because I had not realized how much I needed to be remembered. I had given my life to the small, nameless acts that rarely make it into photo albums, the extra lessons, the lunch shared with a child who had none, the stories told to restless minds. And here, among the pages of her life, was proof that one of those acts had taken root. I sat down, the album on my lap, and stared at the image for a long while. In it I looked younger, my eyes not yet dulled by the years of being overlooked, my hair still dark, tied in a tidy knot. My smile was faint but real, a teacher's smile, one that held back just enough but gave everything. How strange it was to see myself through someone else's lens. I closed the album gently and placed it back where I had found it. Then I sat in the chair by the window and let the morning stretch around me. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I simply existed, fully, with the understanding that somewhere along the way I had mattered more than I realized. Later that afternoon, she returned. She brought in a bag of groceries and moved about the kitchen like she always did, calm, efficient, humming under her breath. I wanted to tell her that I had seen the photo, that I remembered her now, that the girl with the quiet eyes and the bruises on her arms had once placed a pressed flower on my desk without saying a word, and that I had kept it in my desk drawer for years, but I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She glanced at me from across the room, and something in her eyes softened. I knew then that she had left the album where she did on purpose. She had given me a window into her world, just as I had once given her space in mine. That night she prepared a meal unlike any I had tasted in years. Rice steamed with pandan leaf, tofu stewed with tamarind and tomatoes, a small bowl of salted fish like the kind I hadn't eaten since my village days. She didn't ask if I liked it, she didn't need to. She served, sat, and ate beside me without a word, and somehow it was the most beautiful conversation I'd had in a decade. After dinner we sat on the floor with cushions and she lit a small candle. I don't know why, maybe for ambience. Maybe to mark something neither of us could name. I found myself watching the flame dance, and in its flicker I saw pieces of myself. Who I was, who I had been, who I could still be. She stood up at one point and walked to her desk. When she returned, she held a small wrapped package, brown paper tied with string. She handed it to me with both hands, a slight bow in her posture, respectful, almost ceremonial. I hesitated, then took it. Inside was a frame. Not new, not expensive. But in it, the photo of us. Not the one from the album, but a copy she had clearly made, printed, trimmed, placed behind glass with a care that said, "You are seen." I clutched it against my chest. That night, I placed it beside the bed, and as I lay there staring into the dark, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel discarded. I didn't feel like someone left on a bench in the rain. I felt known. And in a life that had taught me to expect very little, that knowing was everything. Time has a peculiar way of softening when we feel safe. The days, once edged with tension and silence, began to unfold gently like pages in a well-worn book. In that small apartment, modest but warm, plain yet pulsing with presence, I started to feel something I thought had slipped away from me forever, a rhythm. Not the structured rhythm of duty or the survival dance of invisibility, but a quiet, tender beat of life lived in peace. I had stayed with her for over a month by then. The days were neither fast nor slow. They simply moved with dignity. Mornings were spent by the windowsill, tending to the herbs with care, watering them drop by drop, speaking to them in my mind as I once had to students. Afternoons were filled with little tasks, folding laundry, dusting her bookshelves, reorganizing the kitchen cabinets not because she asked, but because it gave my hands purpose again. My body, though old and stiff, remembered how to be useful, and use in itself was healing. I never asked how long I would stay. She never offered a timeline. It simply wasn't needed. Our arrangement wasn't built on obligation or transaction. It was something deeper, a mutual recognition, a quiet honoring of the past blooming into the present. Each day I learned more about her, not from words, but from the way she moved through the world. She wrote late into the night sometimes, longhand on thick notepads. Her handwriting was tidy, deliberate, the sort of script that belonged to someone who once found freedom in pages when there was no freedom elsewhere. Her desk was always arranged just so, pens to the left, a photo of her younger self in the center, and a candle she never lit. Only touched from time to time, as though it held some memory she hadn't yet spoken aloud. Though we never spoke directly about it, I knew she had lived a difficult childhood. The bruises I remembered weren't the kind that fade with time. They leave invisible marks, guiding and shaping how one walks into every room thereafter. And yet, despite all that, she had grown into someone capable of extraordinary kindness. She could have become bitter, she could have closed the door like so many others, but she opened it for me. My birthday approached quietly. I didn't mark it on any calendar. I didn't expect it to be mentioned. 85, after all, wasn't a number one celebrates when they have no family, or so I thought. The night before, she returned home late, her arms full of bags. I pretended not to notice, not wanting to intrude on whatever plans she had. But I heard her move around the apartment long after she usually went to bed. Paper rustled, tape clicked. Drawers opened and closed. At one point I heard her laugh softly to herself, a sound so pure it brought tears to my eyes. The morning of my birthday, I awoke to sunlight already spilling across the room in wide golden streaks. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, uncertain if I had imagined it. The soft music playing in the background, the scent of something sweet baking in the oven. The flickering glow of a candle dancing somewhere just out of view. I stepped into the main room and paused. There, on the small dining table, was a birthday cake. Handmade, imperfect, beautiful. The frosting was uneven, the writing shaky, but it said everything. Happy 85th, Ms. Tea, there were flowers in a makeshift vase, wildflowers she must have picked herself, and a card made from folded notebook paper. The edges were jagged from scissors that hadn't cut straight, and yet I had never seen anything so perfectly done. Beside the cake was a wrapped box, brown paper, twine bow, simple, honest. I stood there, not moving. The tears came before I could stop them. But this time they weren't the tears of being forgotten. They were the tears of being remembered. Not for what I had lost, but for what I had given. I hadn't just taught her how to spell or count or read. I had once unknowingly given her the seed of worth, and now she had returned it to me full bloom. Later that day, she asked me to step outside with her. We walked slowly, side by side, down a quiet neighborhood road lined with flowering trees. I noticed she kept glancing at a particular building, an older house with white shutters and a red brick walkway. It had a kind face, like the kind of home you see in movies about second chances. She stopped at the gate, and I realized this house was not just a point of interest. It was meant for me. I didn't understand at first, but as we walked through it room by room, I saw the fingerprints of her care. A bed made with linens in my favorite color. A bookshelf with copies of books I once read aloud in classrooms. A chair by the window, wide enough to curl into, with a view of the sky where birds danced freely. She had found it, prepared it, paid for it for me. A home. Not a shelter, not an institution, not a pity-filled room behind someone's house. A home. I tried to find words, to thank her, to refuse maybe, to insist that she had done enough already. But she just smiled, a smile that held everything she didn't say. This is not a repayment. This is a continuation. I moved in the following week. And for the first time in my life, I unpacked slowly, lovingly, knowing nothing I placed in a drawer would be taken or thrown away. I cooked meals just for me. I lit candles in the evening. I read old poems aloud and laughed when I forgot the lines. I planted a small garden and talked to the seedlings like they were old students. Some eager, some stubborn, all full of potential. My life wasn't large, but it was full. And in that fullness, I found something better than restoration. I found legacy. A quiet legacy, carried not in trophies or headlines or perfect families, but in the life of a young woman who remembered a teacher from decades past. In her gift, she had given me more than shelter. She had given me my name back. She had given me a second birthday. In the stillness of my new home, I began to realize that peace doesn't come with silence alone. It comes with understanding. It arrives not when the past is erased, but when it has been looked in the eye, acknowledged, and given a resting place. And for all the healing I had found in this quiet little house, one thing still moved within me unresolved, like a folded note never opened. My son. I hadn't spoken his name in months. Not aloud, not even in thought. I had kept him sealed away in a space inside me where disappointment festered, untouched by daylight. I had not cried for him since the night I stepped off his porch carrying the cardboard box that held the last of what he hadn't yet thrown away. It wasn't the pain of being unwanted that stung most. It was that I had raised him with love, and still, it had not been enough to keep cruelty at bay. But now, in the quiet moments between my garden and my tea, I found my thoughts returning to him, not with anger, but with a strange, aching clarity. Perhaps it was because I had found a measure of kindness again in this unexpected season of my life. Or maybe it was the photographs I'd started going through, old albums tucked away in the tin I kept on my shelf, where he was still a boy in overalls, still chasing kites across our village fields, still calling me Mama like the word meant something permanent. And so, one morning in late autumn, I sat at my little writing table, took out a sheet of cream-colored paper, and began a letter I never thought I would write. I didn't know if I would send it, but I knew I had to write it. Not for him, but for me. The words came slowly at first, like raindrops gathering before they form a stream. My hand trembled slightly. And the lines weren't straight, but I didn't correct them. I let them fall the way they needed to, honest, unfiltered mine. I told him I had survived. Not just the day he sent me away, but the years of small abandonments before it, the diminishing smiles. The empty promises, the slow replacement of tenderness with irritation. I told him I remembered the birthdays he forgot, the meals he ate in silence, the way his eyes stopped lighting up when I entered a room. I wrote of how a mother notices these things, and how she tells herself it's just stress, or adulthood, or the world hardening a boy she once cradled to sleep. But then I wrote of the day he stopped calling me Mama and started calling me her, as though I had become a stranger in my own home. I told him what it felt like to pack my life into a box, what it meant to be turned into a burden by the child I had loved through sickness, failure, and adolescence. I told him about the rain, about the bench, about the way not a single person stopped until one did. I wrote about her, not in detail, not out of pride or bitterness, but with reverence. I told him that the girl he had once seen in our hallway, the one I had fed during school holidays, the one he dismissed as just another kid I was trying to fix, she had found me again and saved me. I wrote that while he had emptied my room, she had filled a new one with light. I told him I was not alone. And then I did something I wasn't sure I could. I forgave him. Not because he had asked, not because he deserved it, but because I could not carry the weight of his mistake any longer. It was heavy and it was his. I set it down, not with relief but with sorrow, because letting go of resentment meant finally accepting that he might never change. I signed the letter simply, no grand farewell, just my name, the same one he used to write in crayon on Mother's Day cards. Then I folded the paper and slipped it into an envelope. I addressed it carefully. I walked to the post office that same afternoon, my legs steady beneath me. The clerk smiled as she took the envelope, not knowing the years it carried within it. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't expect one. But I felt lighter. In the days that followed, I returned to my simple rituals, watering my garden, walking around the neighborhood, writing little stories on notepads I never intended to publish. The sky began to change color. The season turned again. One morning, a small package arrived at my door. It bore no note, just my name written in a hand I recognized instantly, older now, heavier, but unmistakably his. Inside was a photograph. It was of us. Not recent, not even in focus. Just me and him when he was maybe 5 years old. We were sitting under a tree. I was laughing, something I'd forgotten I used to do so often, and he was holding my hand like it was the only thing keeping the earth from spinning too fast. There was nothing else in the package, no apology, no explanation. But I held that photo against my chest and let the silence say what he could not. He remembered. And sometimes, memory is the first step toward remorse. Sometimes it's all we get. And that has to be enough. That evening I placed the photo beside the one of me and the girl I once taught. They stood side by side on my shelf, two versions of motherhood. One broken, then mended, one nearly lost but found again. I sat down in my favorite chair, blanket over my knees, tea in hand. Outside, the wind stirred the trees gently, as though brushing off the last remains of regret. I closed my eyes and let the quiet take me, not into sleep, but into something even rarer. Peace.